Thank you, Your Honor. The people call Michael Cohen.
Witness entering. State your full name, your last name.
Michael Dean Cohen, Cohen.
Your county of residence.
New York, New York.
Good morning, Mr. Cohen.
Good morning.
You may inquire.
Thank you, Judge. Good morning.
Good morning.
If I might ask, how old are you, Mr. Cohen?
57.
Are you married?
I am.
How long have you been married?
Going on 30 years.
Do you have any children?
I do.
How old are your children?
My daughter is 28. My son is 25. Well, 24. He'll be 25.
Are you testifying here today pursuant to a subpoena?
I am.
Do you have an attorney here in court with you today?
I do.
Mr. Cohen, if you could tell the jury a little about where you grew up and your childhood education.
I grew up in Lawrence, Long Island. It's part of the 5 towns in Nassau County. My father is a Holocaust survivor who ended up emigrating to Toronto, Canada, where he went to medical school. Came to the United States in the mid-60s to teach head and neck reconstructive surgery. Met my mom, who is a surgical nurse. 4 children later, here I am.
Where did you go to college?
I went to the American University in Washington, D.C.
What did you study in college?
Law and government.
After college, what did you do?
I went straight to law school.
Tell the jury a little bit about why you wanted to be a lawyer.
Actually, I didn't want to be a lawyer. My grandmother wanted me to be a lawyer. My family is comprised of doctors and lawyers. My 3 siblings are lawyers. Obviously, my father, my uncles are either doctors or lawyers. The lawyers are married to doctors. I wanted to go to Wall Street. My grandmother was like, that's not going to happen.
So you went to law school?
The witness nods yes.
Did you graduate from law school?
Yes.
What year?
1991.
Were you admitted to practice law?
Yeah.
Do you remember what year that was?
1992.
After law school, where did you move?
I was living at my parents' home and ultimately Manhattan.
Has New York City been your home since that time?
Yes.
Where did you start your legal career?
I started over at 225 Broadway with a firm called Estrin and Associates. It was a personal injury, medical malpractice, tort litigation firm.
In addition to practicing law at some point in the 1990s, did you also buy part of a business in taxi medallions?
I did.
Explain why you did that.
So, one of my clients was leaving the country to move to Israel, and it gave me the opportunity to buy 50% interest in a company called Manhattan Maintenance. That was 1995. And so I did. I thought it was, and it turned out to be at that time, a very good investment.
Did you also invest in some real estate along the years?
I did.
Tell us a little bit about that.
I started purchasing new developments, specifically in Trump properties. My very first one in the year 2000 was at Trump World Tower. I also bought on 60th Street, 431. I'm sorry, it was called Bridge Tower on 60th Street. Ultimately, down the road, I ended up going into business with a friend of mine who had grown up with me, and we started purchasing buildings.
Did there come a time when you became a partner in a law firm called Phillips Nizer?
Yes.
What kind of work did you do there?
I was basically doing business in corporate law.
Did there come a time when you left Phillips Nizer?
Yes.
Approximately what year was that?
2007.
Why did you leave Phillips Nizer?
I left because I was offered an opportunity by Mr. Trump to come work at the Trump Organization as his special counsel.
Do you see Mr. Trump in court today?
I do.
Could you just indicate an article of clothing that he's wearing, please?
Witness lifts up from his seat.
He's wearing a blue and white tie.
Witness takes his seat.
Indicating Mr. Trump.
Thank you. Tell us how you came to work for Mr. Trump at the Trump Organization.
Initially, I was introduced to Mr. Trump by Don Jr. as I was moving into one of his properties. I had purchased several units, and Don Jr. and the Trump Organization was doing the construction to put the units together. There was an issue over at Trump World Tower that Mr. Trump had asked me, because not only did I own an apartment there, but my parents did, my in-laws, my friends. We all bought as a block, going back again to the year 2000. And there was an issue with the board. What we did is we ended up overtaking the board and resolving the issue, which was to Mr. Trump's satisfaction. He liked the way that occurred and then continued to ask me if I would assist in other issues, legal issues, or other matters that he had.
And did you perform some additional legal work for him at that time?
I did.
What?
Some legal, some non-legal matters?
Did he pay you for that work?
No, ma'am.
Did there come a time where this was when you were still at Phillips Nizer?
Yes.
Did there come a time when you presented him with a bill in connection with some work you had done in connection with one of his properties?
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
I was asked to review a series of documents that dealt with Trump Entertainment Resorts. There was an issue.
Who was it who asked you to do that first?
Mr. Trump had asked me.
Thank you.
Again, with Trump Entertainment Resorts, I reviewed it. It was quite lengthy. There was some issues going on there in regard to a Chapter 11 reorganization plan. We ultimately ended up resolving it. And the bill was approximately about $100,000. I was then asked to meet Mr. Trump at the office, which I did, and I asked about the bill. He asked me whether or not I was happy at my sleepy old firm. I stated I was. He said, do you want to come work for me? And I was honored. I was taken by surprise, and I agreed.
What happened? To go back for a moment to the bill for $100,000 that you presented from Philip Nizer, your firm.
Correct.
What happened with that bill?
He asked me if I wanted to get fired on the first day, if I asked about the bill.
So did the bill get paid?
No.
And you say he offered you a position at that point?
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about your discussion about the position that he was offering and the details of it.
So, he offered me the position of Executive Vice President at the Trump Organization and Special Counsel to Donald J. Trump, whereby I would only answer to him and I would work on issues that were of concern to him.
Did you discuss at that point what your salary would be?
We did.
Tell us a little bit about that.
It was a little bit of a back and forth negotiation. He offered me an amount. I said, it's probably not going to work. I gave him a counter, and we ended up resolving on somewhere in the middle number.
Where did you end up? What's the number that you sort of ended up at?
375.
Was that your base salary bonuses?
That's base salary. Bonus, of course, was to be discussed.
So, did you decide at that point to leave your law firm, Philip Nizer, and to work for Donald Trump at the Trump Organization?
I never went back, not even that day. He sent over some employees to my office to pack up my office and gave me Ivanka Trump's old office on 26, the 26th floor.
Is that near his office on the 26th floor?
Yes.
Are we talking about Trump Tower on Fifth Avenue?
Yes.
Where the Trump Organization offices were?
Yes, ma'am.
Approximately how many years did you end up working at the Trump Organization as Mr. Trump's special counsel? Is that what you said?
Yes, ma'am.
How long?
10 years.
2007 to approximately when?
January of 2017.
How old were you when you first started working at Trump Organization for Mr. Trump? If you recall.
I don't...
Were you still in your 30s?
Yes.
And was? I think you mentioned before, but when you started, what was your title?
Executive Vice President and Special Counsel to Donald J. Trump.
And just in terms of your salary and your bonus, approximately all in, how much were you making at the Trump Organization?
$525,000.
And did that change over the years, or did it largely stay the same?
Well, it changed. Initially, after the second year, he cut my salary. Ultimately gave it back 2 years after that, but it stayed the same.
Tell the jury a little bit about what kind of matters you handled for Donald Trump at the Trump Organization during that 10 years.
It was whatever concerned him, whatever he wanted. Initially, when I first started working at the Trump Organization, I was presented with an opportunity and I brought it to Mr. Trump immediately. We liked it. It was in New Jersey. It was called the In-Cap Gulf Redevelopment Project. It was a 1,000-acre landfill remediation project. And this was all very exciting to me because it was all new and I enjoyed the challenge. And along with 2 other colleagues, we started to get this project up and running. It ultimately didn't come to fruition because the funding got pulled by Governor Corzine in New Jersey at the time. But it was an exciting project.
So this is one of the projects that you handled for him?
Yeah.
Who did you report to at the Trump Organization?
Mr. Trump.
Were you at any time part of the General Counsel's office at the Trump Organization?
No, ma'am.
And why not?
That's not the discussion in terms of when I elected to take the position.
It was always reporting directly to Mr. Trump.
Just to Mr. Trump.
So, in the course of your work for Mr. Trump at the Trump Organization, did he ever ask you to renegotiate bills for him?
Yes.
Tell the jury, give us some examples of your renegotiating bills and what you did.
Well, for example, a law firm would send an invoice. He didn't believe that the invoice was fair, reasonable, justified, and so he would give me the task of renegotiating a specific bill.
Did you ever renegotiate bills from other types of vendors? For example, regarding Trump University?
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
So, Trump University fell into trouble, and there were approximately 50 vendors that had not been paid. There was a sum certain that was in the bank at the time. Approximately $2 million, unfortunately, the bills far exceeded that $2 million. But Trump was not going to fund the balance. And so what I did is I put them onto a spreadsheet, a handwritten spreadsheet, divided it by the $2 million, and came up with basically 20% of everyone's invoice. I contacted each and every one of the vendors, and all but two accepted ultimately the 20%. We had releases drafted. And upon the receipt of the release, within 48 hours, we had checks sent to them by FedEx.
So, did Mr. Trump ask you to renegotiate all those bills regarding Trump University?
Yes.
And you said all but two. What happened with the other two vendors?
They just went away.
You mean, did you pay them?
No, ma'am.
Now, once you accomplished that task for Mr. Trump of renegotiating all those bills with the Trump University, did you report back to him?
Yes, but not in its totality. Each and every release was separate. I would go straight into Mr. Trump's office, and I would advise him of the task being accomplished.
Why did you do that?
For two reasons. The first was so that he knew I was on it and I was doing what he had asked. And the second was really to obtain credit so that he understood that, again, I was accomplishing what he wanted.
Do you have a memory of advising him about accomplishing that task of reducing the payments to vendors and his reaction? Do you have a memory of that?
Yes.
What do you remember him saying when you told him you accomplished that task?
It's fantastic. It's great.
How did that make you feel?
Like I was on top of the world.
Did you renegotiate other bills for Mr. Trump at the Trump Organization, besides the ones that you just mentioned?
Yes.
From your experience over the 10 years working at the Trump Organization, are you aware whether Mr. Trump directed other employees or executives to negotiate bills? Not to take the first bill, but to negotiate them down?
Yes,
Let me ask you a question, Mr. Cohen. During the years that you worked for Mr. Trump at the Trump Organization, did you threaten at times to sue people or companies during those years?
Yes.
And explain why you did that.
Well, it would depend on what the issue was. We had an issue, for example, with a Miss USA pageant contestant who, Mr. Trump was being defamed, the Miss Universe organization, so he brought an arbitration against her. That matter ultimately got resolved with the press as an example, that if they said something that angered him, I would reach out to the press, and I would express to them their need to either redact or take the article down, or we would file an action against them.
Did you do that in a strong and threatening manner at times?
I would say so, not all the time, but often.
Now, you mentioned a bit about this. During your time working for Mr. Trump at the Trump Organization, did you also work on some personal matters for him?
Yes.
Can you just give us a brief example of some of that?
So one instance, his limousine was hit by a yellow cab. And knowing that I had deep roots into the yellow cab industry, he asked me to meet with the driver, who provided me with the police report, and to have them pay for the repair on the vehicle.
Did you ever do some personal work regarding his residence or his family, for example?
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
In his apartment, they had a flood that ended up causing damage into the main floor bathroom. They had al fresco on top, and I handled the adjustment with the insurance company.
And these are all matters that Mr. Trump asked you to handle for him?
Yes.
Did you also, as part of your work, and I think you mentioned this, interact frequently with the press for him?
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Again, if it was in order to place a story that would be advantageous in some way, shape, or form, I would speak with them. If there was an article that caused him displeasure, I would speak with them about that as well.
So, did you work with the press to try to minimize negative stories and sort of enhance positive stories about Mr. Trump and his business?
Yes.
Was that a good part of your work for him, interacting with the press for him?
It was a portion of it, yes.
Now, you mentioned that you worked at Trump Tower at the offices of the Trump Organization. Is that right?
That's correct.
During the time that you worked there, where approximately was your office in relation to Mr. Trump's office?
Well, initially when I started, it was towards the back of the office that was Ivanka's old office, until ultimately I moved to a different office that was maybe 50 feet, 60 feet from his office.
During the time you worked there for Mr. Trump, approximately how often would you say you met with him or spoke with him?
Every single day and multiple times per day.
And now we're talking about in the period before he ran for president in 2016. Is that right?
Yes.
Now at the time, again we're talking about pre-2016, but in general explain how you communicated with him.
Generally, it was either in person, on the cell phone, or on the cell phone. Those are the two ways.
Understood. Did you have all of his cell phone and other telephone numbers in your contacts in your phone at the time?
I did.
And you used all those variety of numbers as a way to contact him?
Yes.
When he called you, did he generally call you on your cell phone or your work phone at the Trump Organization?
Well, it was a combination of both. Most of the time, it would be on my cell phone. Unless it was in the office, he would have one of his assistants ring me and ask me just to come to Mr. Trump's office.
Did you ever contact Mr. Trump by contacting somebody else in order to get in contact with him?
Yes.
Who did you contact at various times to reach him?
Many people. It depends also who he was with at the time. It could be Rona, his executive assistant. Ultimately, Keith Schiller, who was his personal attaché. It could be one of the Trump children. It could be Hope Hicks. It was any number of people.
And you had, for example, Keith Schiller's number in your contacts as well, right?
Yes.
And Hope Hicks's number in your contacts as well. And you used those numbers in your contacts to make those calls. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
As far as you know, did Mr. Trump use email to do his work?
No, Mr. Trump never had an email address.
Did he ever comment to you about folks who time to time get into trouble using email?
Yes.
Can you tell us about that?
Yes. During certain conversations, he would comment that emails are like written papers. He knows too many people who have gone down as a direct result of having emails that prosecutors can use in a case.
When you say going down, do you mean getting in some sort of trouble?
Yes, ma'am.
When you met him in person, you said. Where did you generally meet him?
In his office.
What times of day generally in his office?
All throughout the day.
Were they sometimes early in the morning?
Yes.
Sometimes later, towards the end of the day, or even early evening?
Yes.
When you met him at the office, did you generally meet in his office?
Yes.
Did you need to make an appointment to go see him in his office?
No, ma'am.
Can you explain, what kind of a policy was there at the Trump organization about executives coming in to meet with Mr. Trump?
Mr. Trump had an open door policy, which if there was somebody in there, you waited. And if not, you knocked on the door. And I would say, boss, do you have a second? And I would walk right in.
And others did the same, to your knowledge?
To my knowledge, yes.
Now, when you met with Mr. Trump at the Trump organization in his office, did you generally record those meetings in your calendar?
No, ma'am.
As part of your work at the Trump organization, did you feel that it was part of your job to keep him updated on matters that you were handling for him?
Yes, it was actually required.
Tell us what you mean by that.
When he would task you with something, he would then say, keep me informed. Let me know what's going on. And what he was saying, what everybody did is, as soon as you had a result, an answer, you would go straight back and tell him, especially if it was a matter that was troubling to him.
So, 2 things just to break that down. You said everybody. Do you mean you're aware of other executives who...
I apologize, yes, other executives.
So they would report back to him as well?
Yes.
But you felt it was part of your job, and what he wanted from you, to promptly report to him when you were handling a matter for him about the progress and whether it was resolved.
Yes, and that's what I did.
Did you have a sense or did you learn from your experiences with him that if you didn't keep him updated or things didn't go well that you were working on, that would create an issue for Mr. Trump?
Yes.
Can you explain that just a little bit?
If you didn't immediately provide him with the information and he learned of it in another manner, that wouldn't go over well for you.
To the extent that you discussed the requirement to report frequently to Mr. Trump, was it your sense, based on working with him, that he was a micromanager about the work of his organization and of which he was concerned?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you have a way of referring to Mr. Trump when you worked for him?
Yes,
What was that?
I would call him boss, Mr. Trump.
And in working for him for 10 years, all the variety of the types of work that you did for him, what was it like for you? How did you feel about working at the Trump organization during those years?
It was fantastic. It was. Working for him, especially during those 10 years, was an amazing experience in many, many ways. There were great times. There were several less than great times. But for the most part, I enjoyed the responsibilities that were given to me. I enjoyed working with my colleagues at the Trump organization, the Trump children. It was a big family.
During the years that you worked for him at the Trump organization, did you at times lie for him?
I did.
Why did you do that?
Because it's what was needed in order to accomplish a task.
Was there also did you feel a sense of obligation towards him as well?
Yes.
Did you at times during your work for the Trump organization, at the Trump organization for Mr. Trump, bully people for him?
Yes, ma'am.
Why did you do that?
Again, in order to accomplish the task. The only thing that was on my mind was to accomplish the task, to make him happy.
Now, over the years that you worked for him, did he reward you with some additional titles?
Yes.
Tell us just a little bit about that.
Well, he placed me on the board of the Miss Universe organization. There were 3 members, Mr. Trump, Alan Weisselberg, and myself. Years later, myself and another colleague were made co-presidents of Trump Productions. I sat on the board of 5 different Trump properties as treasurer.
Those were some of the additional titles that he rewarded you with?
Yes, ma'am.
Are you aware that in connection with your work for him, some people described you as his fixer?
Yes, some have described me as that.
From your perspective, is that in some ways an accurate title, an accurate moniker?
It's fair.
I just want to ask you some questions about your telephone numbers, and I'm going to ask you only about the last 4 digits of some of those numbers. During the period of 2015 to 2017, when you were working at the Trump Organization, did you use a cell phone number ending in 6866?
I did.
Did you also use a cell phone number ending in 0114?
I did.
And did you continue to use those 2 numbers for a period of time after you left the Trump Organization?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you still continue to this day to use the cell phone number ending 0114?
Yes.
Now, during the time that you worked at the Trump Organization for Mr. Trump, you also had a landline work number. Is that right?
That's correct.
Was that 212-836-3212?
Yes, ma'am.
Obviously, you no longer use that number.
No, ma'am.
After you left the Trump Organization, did you also have a number associated with a law firm in New York?
Yes.
Was that 212-872-9849?
Yes.
Obviously, you don't still use that number.
No, ma'am.
In connection with the investigation of this case, did our office ask you to provide 2 cell phones that you had used for a period of time up until April of 2018?
Yes.
And did you agree to provide those 2 cell phones to us that you had previously used with the 2 numbers? Cell phone numbers that I just mentioned, ending in 0114 and 6866?
Yes, I did.
Did you provide those phones to us in January of 2023?
Sounds correct, yes.
And was that pursuant to our request that you turned those over to us?
Yes, merely the request.
Did you consent to do that voluntarily?
I did.
Now you keep contacts on your phones. There were contacts that were kept on those phones, is that right?
That's correct.
What kind of information just generally was in your contacts on those phones?
Names, email addresses, potential addresses, cell phone numbers, home numbers, fax numbers.
Were there also sometimes other information associated with folks whose contacts you had in there?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you keep anybody else's contacts in your phone as well?
Personal ones, yes.
In other words, however, what I'm asking about is not just your contacts of your contacts and the folks that you know, but did you also at some point include or sync with your contacts somebody else's contacts?
I did.
Tell the jury about that.
Actually, I didn't do it. It was done by the IT people. I was spending a significant amount of time with Mr. Trump, and we ultimately decided, he agreed, to have his contact number synced to my cell number, to my account as well. That way, if we needed to travel, if he needed to get somebody on the phone, he would just say, Michael, get me so-and-so on the line, and I would have them in my cell phone.
As a result of this syncing process, did your personal contacts also end up in his phone?
I'm not certain about that.
You're not certain. Just his contacts in your phone?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you remember approximately when you synced or someone else synced his contacts into your phone, if you know?
I don't.
As a result of having both your contacts and Mr. Trump's contacts in your phone, did you have over 30,000 contacts in your phone?
Yes, ma'am.
During the time you worked at the Trump Organization for Mr. Trump, was your email address mccohen@trumporg.com?
Yes, it was.
After you left the Trump Organization during the years of 2017 and 2018, did you also use another email address, mccohen@mdpe.com?
Yes.
You no longer have that email address, is that right?
That's correct.
Did you also use a personal Gmail address that you still currently use?
Yes.
Mr. Cohen, do you know someone named David Pecker?
I do.
Who is he and how do you know him?
I knew David Pecker before I even knew Mr. Trump. We had mutual friends and we had met at a function out in Long Island many, many years ago. I then was reacquainted with David Pecker, who is the president, CEO of AMI. Most people know him more from his magazines and his newspapers, National Enquirer, Star, OK, and Men's Health, etc.
Did you from time to time speak to Mr. Pecker even before he came? Before you started at the Trump Organization?
Not regularly, no.
Once you were at the Trump Organization and introduced to him again by Mr. Trump, did you speak to him from time to time?
Yes.
When you spoke to him, did you speak to him by phone?
Yes.
Did you have his cell phone and work numbers in your phone contacts?
Yes.
Did you use those contacts to speak with him?
Yes, ma'am.
At times, did you also speak with Mr. Pecker using an encrypted application called Signal?
Yes.
Why did you do that?
Well, depending upon the matter, sometimes we thought that encryption, not having the event traceable, would be beneficial.
Was it because it was something you wanted to keep confidential and didn't want anybody to be able to trace it or look into those communications?
Yes, ma'am.
And did you also at times communicate with Mr. Pecker by email?
Yes.
And you had his email address as well in your contacts, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, did you speak with Mr. Pecker at the Trump Organization about matters having to do with Mr. Trump prior to June of 2015?
Yes, but rarely.
And was it? What sort of matters were the few matters that you spoke to him about, if you can remember, prior to 2015?
There were some things that had come up. For example, Mr. Trump had donated money to a charity. It was Harlem for Hoops. We had come into information that they had no funding, and I brought it to Mr. Trump's attention. He said, yes, we wanted to get the story out, so it would be things like that. And
To try to get a good story out about him?
a good story, yes.
And, to your knowledge, prior to 2015, when Mr. Trump announced that he was running for the presidency, did you know whether Mr. Pecker or AMI ever paid for public stories to prevent them from becoming public?
There were stories.
I apologize. My question is quite wrong. Prior to Mr. Trump announcing his run for the presidency, are you aware of AMI ever paying to suppress stories?
No, ma'am.
Would you say you had a good relationship with Mr. Pecker?
I would, yes.
Did you know someone named Dylan Howard?
I do.
Who was Dylan Howard?
Dylan Howard was an employee over at AMI.
What was your understanding about what his role was at AMI, if you knew?
He worked for Mr. Pecker to the same extent that I worked for Mr. Trump.
Did you speak with Mr. Howard in person or generally by phone?
I spoke to everybody in 3 different manners, by phone, by email, and in person.
Did you have Mr. Dillon's phone numbers and contacts in your phone?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you use those numbers to contact him?
I did.
Now, at times, did you also communicate with Mr. Howard using that encrypted application signal?
Yes, ma'am.
And why did you choose to do that with your communications with Mr. Howard?
For the same reason. It was a sensitive matter that we wanted to keep private.
Did you also communicate by text with Mr. Howard?
Yes.
And sometimes by email?
Yes.
Again, using your contacts that you had in your phone?
Yes, ma'am.
Did there come a time in 2011 that Mr. Trump was exploring a run for the presidency?
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So, in 2011, I had come across, while reading the paper, a poll that stated 6% of all the people who had taken the poll thought Mr. Trump should be president of the United States of America. And so, I took that article and I brought it to Mr. Trump. And I said, what do you think? He said, it's interesting, we should look into it.
And did he look into it in some degree in 2011?
He did.
Do you recall whether he spoke publicly in 2011 about exploring a run for the presidency?
He did. That was posts I had created for him, my own website called shouldtrumprun.com. And many people came to that website, and it was further proof that his name recognition, his popularity, especially because of the hit show, The Apprentice, was so strong.
And just to go back to the question, do you remember giving some public speech? Him giving public speeches about his considering a run for the presidency in 2011?
Yes.
Were those, if you recall, covered in the news?
Yes.
Did he ultimately decide to run for the presidency in 2011?
No.
What was your understanding why he decided not to run?
There were several large real estate projects he acquired, as well as another season of The Apprentice. And as Mr. Trump told me, you don't leave Hollywood. Hollywood leaves you.
So he decided to stay and do that work instead?
Yes, ma'am.
Did there come a time then in June of 2015 when Mr. Trump announced that he was running for president?
Yes.
And how did he make that announcement, if you recall?
I do. It was at the atrium at Trump Tower. He came down the stairs to the lowest level, and we had set up a podium. He made the announcement and a speech.
Now, at the time, in June of 2015, were you, or any time, an official paid member of Mr. Trump's campaign?
No.
Nevertheless, did you assist Mr. Trump in his campaign?
So just some colorfulness. In 2011, when Mr. Trump decided not to run, he actually promised me that he was going to do it in the next election cycle. And for years thereafter, we would talk about him running in 2015. At the very beginning, when he ultimately said, I'm doing it, there was a lot of back and forth about which date the announcement should be. A very small group of people were attached to the campaign when it first launched.
Did you have some discussions directly with Mr. Trump about what your role might be in terms of assisting with his campaign?
I wasn't going to be part of it. I was just going to be a surrogate.
Explain what you mean by surrogate.
Sure. Surrogate was someone who speaks on behalf of the candidate and defends him in the press, speaks to the press, provides color, but not as a member of the campaign, but rather as an outside person. So again, as to give the appearance that it's unbiased.
And that's the role that you performed for him and for the campaign?
Yes.
And did you make public appearances for him and for his campaign?
I did.
Tell us a little bit about that. What kind of public appearances?
I would make public appearances on television, CNN, MSNBC, ABC, whoever, CBS. I would frequently provide comment to press regarding different matters that kept popping up.
Did you leverage your press contacts in that way from Mr. Trump's campaign?
Yes.
Your relationships?
Yes.
Did you also develop some relationships with some key people on behalf of the campaign who put together some kind of committees or groups for him?
Yes.
Tell the jury a little bit about that.
So while watching the rallies, I had gone to Mr. Trump and I said, one of the things that I notice is that it's very white. And we really need diversity. If you're going to win, you're going to need diversity. And so I started a group called National Diversity Coalition for Trump, along with Pastor Carol Scott, an evangelical pastor from Cleveland, Ohio.
And you did that for his campaign, is that right?
I did.
Did you have other important contacts in the Christian evangelical community that you sort of worked with for Mr. Trump?
Yes.
Did you have a campaign email address, by the way?
Yes, I was given a campaign email address around the time that the campaign began.
Did Mr. Trump express to you any concern about negative stories about his personal life that might affect his candidacy?
Yes.
What? Generally, what did he say in substance?
You know that when this comes out, meaning the announcement, just be prepared. There's going to be a lot of women coming forward.
Now, turning back to his announcement of running for the presidency in June of 2015, did you invite David Pecker to attend that announcement?
I did.
Did you invite other people as well?
I did.
Now, sometime after the announcement in June, in about August of 2015, did you and Mr. Trump meet with David Pecker at Trump Tower to discuss what AMI could do for the campaign?
Yes, ma'am.
Where exactly did the three of you meet?
Mr. Trump's office on the 26th floor.
Could you tell the jury, please, what was discussed and what was agreed to at that meeting?
What was discussed was the power of the National Enquirer in terms of being located at the cash register of so many supermarkets and bodegas, that if we can place positive stories about Mr. Trump, that would be beneficial. That if we could place negative stories about some of the other candidates, that would also be beneficial.
Was there anything else that Mr. Pecker said he could also do for Mr. Trump's candidacy?
Yeah.
What in substance did he say?
What he said was that he could keep an eye out for anything negative about Mr. Trump, and that he would be able to help us to know in advance what was coming out and try to stop it from coming out.
And who did he say he would get in touch with if he was able to identify those types of stories?
The answer was me, Mr. Trump also. Knowing my relationship with David, the two of you should work together, and anything negative that comes, you let Michael know, and we'll handle it.
Now, subsequent to that meeting during the campaign, did AMI run stories that were positive for Mr. Trump?
Yes, ma'am.
And did they run stories that were negative on Mr. Trump's opponents?
Yes, ma'am.
And in the course of that, did AMI preview for Mr. Trump and for you some of those stories that they were going to run in their magazines and periodicals?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you describe just a few that you recall that they ran, specifically to benefit Mr. Trump? Some stories that were either negative on his opponents or positive for him.
So some of the negative ones that I would receive from David or from Dylan Howard was Hillary Clinton wearing very thick glasses and some allegations that she had some brain injury. There was Ted Cruz, a photo of his father with Lee Harvey Oswald, claiming that Ted Cruz's father was involved in the assassination of JFK. There was an article on Marco Rubio in a swimming pool with a bunch of other men, claiming that they were having a drug binge of some sort.
Did AMI sometimes send over the covers of some of these stories to you before they ran them?
Yes.
And what did you do with that material when they sent it over to you?
Immediately showed it to Mr. Trump.
And for what purpose did you show it to Mr. Trump?
So that he knew that David was loyal, was on board, was doing everything that he said he was going to do in that August meeting, and was actually doing it.
And do you recall from time to time when you showed Mr. Trump some of those stories what in general, his reactions were?
That's fantastic. That's unbelievable.
Now, did AMI ever actually seek your input into the types of stories or the content of some of the stories that they were going to run?
Yes.
Can we show, please, People's Exhibit 166, which is in evidence? Are you able to read that, Mr. Cohen?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you recognize generally this email?
I do.
Can you just tell the jury a little bit about what this email was?
This is an email from me, Trump Org, on January 6th, 2016, to Barry Levine and CC'd to Dylan Howard. Barry Levine was an employee as well at AMI.
Did Barry Levine send you something in this email?
Yes.
What did he send you?
He sent to me an email that says, Michael, greetings and Happy New Year. As our readers can't get enough of Mr. Trump, we are repackaging and repurposing past material from our files and adding additional material, of course also of a positive nature. Then goes on, there's a series of bullet points. Donald has quietly given away.
He's describing the content of some of these articles.
Yes.
Can we blow up the top email to Barry Levine? And you copied Dylan Howard on it. Read your response.
I stated, yes, take out the part of the penthouse pet Sandra as it offers nothing. Also, I would like to reword the part about Atlantic City. Let's speak tomorrow.
Why did you ask AMI to remove the penthouse pet reference?
I thought it would be negative to Mr. Trump as, again, it dealt with women and penthouse.
And did AMI agree to make the edits that you suggested?
Yes, ma'am.
What is the title of the story? Can you just scroll down just a little bit? Thank you so much. The title of that story. Can you see what the title of that story was going to be? Was it The Trump That Nobody Knows?
Yes, it was going to go under the headline, The Donald Trump Nobody Knows.
And I'm sorry, would you say again what the date of this email was?
January 6th of 2016.
Okay. And can we now take that down and put up People's 152 in evidence? And can we direct your attention to the article entitled, The Trump Nobody Knows? And maybe you can just center on that. Did this article actually come out?
Yes, ma'am.
That you spoke to AMI about?
I'm sorry.
That's all right. You said that the email that you sent was either January 6th of 2016. And what's the date of this article here?
It was posted on January 13th of 2016.
So, about a week later, AMI ran the article with your suggestions?
Yes, ma'am.
And is this an example of your working with AMI to get articles out that benefited Mr. Trump's campaign?
It is an example.
And this was consistent with what was discussed at the Trump Tower meeting with Mr. Pecker and Mr. Trump?
Yes.
Thank you, we can take that down. Now, in the fall of 2015, did you come to learn of a negative story being circulated by a former doorman at Trump Tower?
Yes, ma'am.
And how did you learn of that story?
I was told of the story by either David Pecker or Dylan Howard.
And very briefly, what was the nature of the story that they indicated to you was out there circulating?
That there was a love child.
Actually, I think I take my question back about the circulating, that they heard about the doorman who had this story, right?
Yes, ma'am.
After you learned of the story, did you speak to Mr. Trump about it?
I did.
Why did you do that?
Well, I went to him immediately to advise him that there was a story because it was a negative story for him and to get his direction on what he wanted me to do.
Did you indicate to him at the time the name of the employees who were referenced in this potential story?
Yes, I provided him with all of the information.
And did it involve actually 2 employees at the Trump Organization?
Yes, ma'am.
Who were married to each other?
Yes.
Did Mr. Trump? Can you describe your conversation that you had with Mr. Trump when you advised him of this? What did he tell you to do?
He told me to make sure that this story doesn't get out. You handle it.
Did he ask you also to do anything with respect to the affected employees?
Yes.
What did he say in substance?
He asked me to speak to them and let them know it's being taken care of.
Now, what did you do at that point, in terms of making sure that the story didn't get out?
I worked with David Pecker and Dylan Howard.
And you worked with them to do what?
In order to obtain the story, all of the life rights to the story.
Who did you understand was going to either purchase or try to take care of? Well, take care of purchasing the life rights to the story or otherwise making sure that the story didn't get out?
David Pecker.
And along the way, did either Dylan Howard or David Pecker update you about what they were doing with respect to that story?
Yes, ma'am.
And as the matter progressed and you got updates from Dylan Howard or David Pecker, did you update Mr. Trump about the matter?
Immediately.
Now, at some point, did you learn that AMI had entered into an agreement with the doorman regarding this story?
Yes.
What did you learn, just briefly, about what the general terms were of the agreement that AMI entered into with this particular doorman?
That they were going to pay $30,000. They were executing an agreement with the doorman in order to obtain the life rights to this story.
And when you say to obtain the life rights, was it to publish the story or not publish the story?
It was to not publish the story.
But to control the life rights so that nobody else could publish it.
Correct. Take it off the market.
Now, did you update? Actually, when Dylan Howard and Mr. Pecker told you they were going to do that, they were going to acquire the life rights for $30,000. Did you tell them that Mr. Trump would be grateful?
Absolutely.
And when you spoke to Mr. Trump about it, was he grateful?
Absolutely.
Now, did AMI at some point send you their agreement with the doorman for those life rights for $30,000?
Yes.
And did you review it?
I did.
Why did you review it?
Well, I reviewed it to ensure that Mr. Trump was fully protected. I also asked them to send it to me so that I could show Mr. Trump that it's being taken care of.
And did you? When you reviewed that agreement, Did you provide AMI with any feedback about the terms in the agreement?
I did.
What did you tell them?
I thought that there needed to be a clause in there, a significant penalty for $1 million per violation of any of the terms of the agreement to ensure that the doorman knew not to go ahead and to talk about this matter.
So you suggested that there be a heavy hammer to make sure that he didn't break the terms of the agreement?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you also suggest some other term involving perpetuity for this agreement?
Yes.
Can you explain that?
What I found was that the agreement had what I considered to be an end date to, and so rather I said, why not just, let's make this in perpetuity.
What does that mean, in perpetuity?
It means that it's forever, that he owns the document, they own the story forever, and it can never come out.
And did AMI agree to include that term as well in the agreement?
He did.
Can we put up, please, People's 165 in evidence? And do you recognize that email, first of all?
I do.
Who is it from and who is it to?
It's from Dylan Howard on December 19th of 2015 to me at the Trump org, with the subject headline of Update. Reads, Michael, it was remiss of me not to contact you yesterday. We were on deadline for the magazines. Nevertheless, I wanted to confirm that the source executed an addendum to the agreement with a liquidated damages clause. He has been compensated accordingly. Cheers, Dylan.
Can we also put up now People's 155 in evidence? It's possible to blow that up just a little bit. Do you recognize that, Mr. Cohen?
I do, ma'am.
What is that?
This is the amendment that I was just describing.
And is that the amendment that contains the $1 million liquidation clause and the clause about it continuing in perpetuity?
Yes, that would be sections 2 and 3 of the amendment.
Now, once that was accomplished by AMI and they included the terms that you wanted to protect Mr. Trump, did you advise Mr. Trump that you had gotten that done?
Yes, ma'am.
Why did you tell him that?
Again, in order to ensure that he knows that David's doing exactly what he said he would. Also for credit.
In terms of credit, did you tell him that you got the $1 million put in and the in perpetuity clause put in?
Yes.
Why did you do that?
In order to get credit for accomplishing the task.
And was. What was Mr. Trump's reaction when you told him that?
It's great. That's great.
Now, is it your understanding that AMI bought the life rights to the doorman story as part of what Mr. Pecker had agreed to at the Trump Tower meeting with you and Mr. Trump in August 2015?
Yes.
You could take that down. Thank you so much. Let me direct your attention now to June of 2016. And around that time, did you learn that a woman by the name of Karen McDougal was looking to sell a story regarding her relationship with Mr. Trump?
Yes, ma'am.
And how did you learn that?
Again, I received a call from David Pecker or Dylan Howard.
And what generally did they tell you, just briefly in substance, about what this story was about?
That she's a Playboy playmate, and that there is a story that is looking to be sold on the street to news outlets about a relationship that she had had with Mr. Trump.
And when you learned of the story, what, if anything, did you think about its potential impact on Mr. Trump's presidential campaign?
Significant.
Did you tell Mr. Trump what you had learned from AMI about Karen McDougal?
Immediately after I got off the phone with AMI.
And can you tell us about the conversation you had with Mr. Trump after learning about that story?
So I went to the office, knocked on it. I said, "Boss, I got to talk to you." He said, "Come in." I went in. I told him about what I had just learned. I asked him if he knew who Karen McDougal was, if he knows anything about the story. His response to me was, "She's really beautiful." Said, "Okay, but there is a story that's right now being shopped."
And did you draw on any, based on your experience with Mr. Trump, did you draw any conclusion based on his response to you?
Objection.
Sustained.
Did Mr. Trump ask you to take any action with respect to the story?
Yes.
What did he ask you in general to do?
Make sure it doesn't get released.
What did you do as a result? What did you take that to mean you should do?
We need to acquire the story. And so I went ahead and I reached back out to both Dylan Howard as well as to David Pecker.
Now, during the time period of about June 16th or so of 2016 to August 5th of 2016, did you communicate frequently, regularly, with Mr. Pecker and Mr. Howard regarding Karen McDougal?
Yes, ma'am.
Why did you do that?
Again, the purpose is to stop the story from being sold or marketed to an outside source.
Did you want to make sure that AMI was doing that?
Absolutely.
Objection.
Sustained.
And was that consistent with what they had? David Pecker had agreed to do at Trump Tower, to notify you if matters like this were happening?
Yes.
How did you communicate with David Pecker and Dylan Howard during this time?
Again, it would either be by phone, text, email, app.
Okay. When you say app, sometimes using the Signal app.
Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry, the Signal app.
That's okay. Let me just finish the question and then you answer, because the court reporter also needs to get it down.
I'm sorry.
And did you use for this transaction that you were working with AMI? Did you use the Signal app?
I believe so.
And why was that?
Again, because of the nature of the issue, to make sure that it remained private.
At various times when you were receiving updates from either Dylan Howard or David Pecker about the progress with Karen McDougal, did you update Mr. Trump frequently?
Yes.
Can we put up now, please? People's Exhibit 177. Now I'm just going to ask you, do you recognize these texts between yourself and Dylan Howard during this time period, from about June 16th of 2016 to November 1st of 2016?
I think it says here June 20th of 2016.
My apologies. Do you recognize these texts during the time period that's referenced in this exhibit?
I do.
Let's take a look at first, please, the text with Dylan Howard on June 16th of 2016. Can you read out for the jury all of the texts from June 16th of 2016? And along the way, you can tell the jury what they refer to and what they mean.
So this is a June 16th of 2016 communication between Dylan Howard and myself, and it states, meeting will be on Monday, per their terms, Dylan.
And what's your response?
My response back was, understood, thank you for everything.
What did you understand this was about in terms of the meeting on their terms?
This is about meeting with Karen McDougal and her people.
Now let me direct your attention. What is the date of this?
The date is June 16th of 2016.
And can we take that down for a moment and show People's Exhibit 262 in evidence? I want to. Do you recognize these texts with Keith Schiller between yourself and Keith Schiller?
I do.
Now you recall that you told the jury that sometimes you spoke to or contacted Keith Schiller in order to get in touch with Mr. Trump.
Yes.
Can we look at page 2, please, lines 16 to 20, dated June 16th of 2016? Can you see if we can pull those out? Mr. Cohen, can you read those texts between yourself and Keith Schiller on that same day, June 16th of 2016?
Yes, ma'am. So this is from me to Keith Schiller asking, can we speak? I need you.
And what does he respond?
He then responds, I didn't receive
a response back. And so I followed it up with another that says, you there? He then responds to me, on Dallas. I think he meant in Dallas. I then respond to him, where's the boss? Which of course referenced Mr. Trump. He then responds to me, text to me, and then I then ask, is he free to speak? Why are you trying to reach Mr. Trump on this date of June 16th, 2016?
Regarding the Karen McDougal matter.
Was it an update that... In response to an update that you had just received from Dylan Howard about a meeting with Karen McDougal's people?
Yes, that I thought was important.
Is this an example of you contacting Mr. Trump to give him updates about what was progressing with Karen McDougal?
Yes, ma'am.
You can take that down. Can we now put up People's 349 in evidence? And take a look at the call on 6 of 16 of 2016. Do you recognize these? These are calls between yourself and Mr. Trump, summary calls. Do you see a call between the two of you at 6:51 p.m.?
Yes, ma'am.
For 2 minutes and 31 seconds. Did you have that call with Mr. Trump right after you asked Keith Schiller if he was available? Meaning Mr. Trump. To speak?
Yes.
And what do you believe that you discussed with Mr. Trump on that call?
The updates that I received on the Karen McDougal matter.
Thank you. You can take that down. We go back now, please, to People's Exhibit 177A in evidence. And can we pull out the texts on June 20th of 2016? Blow those up for Mr. Cohen.
Thank you.
Can you start with the texts from Dylan Howard that says, I'm about to meet her. Her name is Karen McDougal.
Yes, ma'am.
Former Playboy playmate.
So I received a series of messages. This one is dated Monday, June 20th of 2016, whereby Dylan Howard sends to me, I'm about to meet with her. Her name is Karen McDougal, former Playboy playmate. Then respond to Mr. Howard, okay, we need to speak. He then responds to me, yes, He then responds to me again, when we break. And I respond back, okay. He then sends to me a response, spoke, it says spike, but it means spoke to DP, referencing David Pecker. We just broke. I'm wrapping up with them. And then we will convene a three-way call between us all to sort this out. Understand? I've got this locked down for you. I won't let it get out of my grasp. I won't let it out of my grasp.
Now, did you insist at this time on having a call with Dylan Howard right after he met with Karen McDougal?
Yes, ma'am.
And why did you do that?
Because I needed to get an update so I could provide it to Mr. Trump.
And shortly after these updates from Mr. Howard, did you actually have a call with both Dylan Howard and David Pecker to find out about their interview with Karen McDougal?
Yes, ma'am.
And what was the substance of what they told you during that three-person call about progress with Karen McDougal?
That they believe that they have this under control, as Dylan had stated to me. I will get this locked down for you, and I won't let it out of my grasp.
Did Dylan Howard tell you what his opinion was about whether he believed that Karen McDougal had had a relationship with Mr. Trump?
Objection.
Sustained.
Was it important for you to have that call with Dylan Howard and David Pecker?
Yes.
And that's to make sure that things were being taken care of for Mr. Trump?
Yes.
Did you have another call later that night with Dylan Howard to have some further conversations about the progress of the deal?
Yes.
Now, you said you did update Mr. Trump on the progress at that point with Karen McDougal?
Yes, ma'am.
And do you know whether at that time that update was either in person or by telephone?
I don't recall.
I'm going to direct your attention now to a little later in June of 2016, maybe a week or so, around the same time. Were you present for a conversation that Mr. Trump had directly with David Pecker about the Karen McDougal matter?
Yes, ma'am.
Where were you when you were present for and overheard that conversation?
In Mr. Trump's office.
And who else was in the office besides yourself and Mr. Trump?
No response from the witness.
It was just the two of you?
I believe so, yes.
And did he have a call at that point with Mr. Pecker?
Yes.
How did he make that call?
He had the call put through, and he had a speaker box on his desk, and instead of lifting up the phone, he used the speaker box so I was able to hear.
And can you tell the jury about what you recall from that conversation that Mr. Trump had with Mr. Pecker?
He asked him how things were going with the matter, and David said, "We have this under control, and we will take care of this."
Was there a discussion on that call about how much might cost to buy this story and who might pay for it?
Yes, ma'am.
Just in substance, what was that conversation?
So David had stated that it's going to cost them $150,000 to control the story, to which Mr. Trump replied, "No problem. I will take care of it."
Was there an understanding about who would initially purchase that story?
Yes.
And who was discussed on that call that would purchase that story?
AMI was going to lay out the funds, and as Mr. Trump had stated to David, "I will take care of it."
And what did you understand that to mean?
He was going to pay it back.
But it wasn't. Was it described at that point how that might occur?
No, ma'am.
After that call, did you then have a call or call Mr. Pecker?
Yes.
And tell us a little bit about that conversation that you had with Mr. Pecker.
I just wanted to make sure that I was being updated regarding the entire matter.
Did you let him know on that call that you had overheard that conversation that he had with Mr. Trump?
Yes.
Now let's put back up, if we could please, 177, Mr. Cohen's texts with Dylan Howard. And now the texts on July 28th of 2016 through July 29th of 2016. And let's see if we can call those out for Mr. Cohen to read.
So it's Thursday, July 28th of 2016. It's from me to Dylan Howard. "Can you call me?" Dylan Howard responds back, "I've not heard back from our guy yet, so no update. Let me call him this AM and get latest. Does that work?"
Who did you understand his guy to be?
I believe it was Keith Davidson.
And who was Keith Davidson in relation to this matter?
Keith Davidson is an attorney that was representing Ms. McDougal in this transaction.
And did you understand from Dylan Howard that Mr. Davidson was doing the negotiating with AMI for Ms. McDougal?
Yes.
Objection, Judge.
Can you continue reading?
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Objection.
Overruled.
Okay.
Same date, Thursday, the 28th of July, 2016. I sent a text to Dylan Howard. Yes, and thank you.
Again, if you could read them just as they apply to July 29th.
Sure. He then expresses to me they rejected the offer, told them to come back to me. It says my, but it's me by EOD, which means end of day, with a realistic number. He agreed to that. He fears she has been convinced to tell her story at ABC and really wants to. I implored my guy to get it done. All caps. He's getting back to me.
Is that the last text?
No.
I'm sorry, I apologize.
I then respond back to him. Okay. To which he then responds to me. We are having a video conference with her next week to outline the opportunities we will present to. We will present her to sign up with us. Then ask, do you know what day? And he responds to me, Monday or Tuesday. And I respond again, okay, thank you.
Now, why were you pressing for this information from Dylan Howard?
So several things here. One, I wanted to know what the number was because I would have to report that to Mr. Trump. When they stated that they are having a video conference with her next week to outline the opportunities, I needed to know what day, again, so that I could update Mr. Trump and he could have all the necessary information.
Did you also speak to David Pecker around this time about how things were moving along in the negotiation with Karen McDougal and her lawyers?
Yes.
Was there some particular pressure that you felt at this point that AMI should get this done?
Yes.
What was that?
There was the campaign, and we were concerned that this story was going to find its way to ABC, meaning ABC News, 2 Now.
We can take that down. Thank you. Let me direct your attention now to August 5th. Well, withdrawn. At some point in August now 2016, so shortly after those texts, did you learn that indeed an agreement had been finalized between AMI and Karen McDougal?
Yes.
And how did you learn that?
I was told by David Pecker and Dylan Howard.
And what was your understanding from them about what the terms of that agreement were going to be?
The terms were going to be compensation to her in the amount of $150,000, as well as they were going to provide her with 24 penned articles that would bear her name, as well as she was going to be on 2 covers of one of the various magazines that they owned.
And did you have a conversation just between yourself and David Pecker about the parameters of this agreement with Ms. McDougal?
Yes.
Did Mr. Pecker tell you that he felt that the agreement was bulletproof?
Yes.
And what did you understand that to mean?
That they got it, that this is locked down. We prevented the story from being released on ABC News, and effectively the story has now been caught.
And did you update Mr. Trump on that conversation?
Yes, ma'am.
And did you tell him that you had been told by David that the agreement was bulletproof?
Yes.
What was Mr. Trump's reaction to hearing that an agreement had been signed and done, and that it was bulletproof?
Fantastic. Great job.
Now, did at some point Keith Davidson, the attorney for Karen McDougal, reach out to you after the agreement had been finalized with AMI?
Yes.
Were you familiar at that time with who Keith Davidson was?
Yes.
And how did you know him at that time?
I had worked with Keith Davidson back in 2011 when there was a story that was out that dealt with Stormy Daniels, and in that story, it was on a website called thedirty.com, that Stormy actually wanted to be taken down, and we had worked together to effectuate that.
To take the story down from The Dirty?
Yes.
Now let me have you take a look, please, at People's Exhibit 62 in evidence. By the way, your communications with Keith Davidson were also by phone, also by text?
Yes, it was by phone, email, text.
Did you also sometimes communicate with him on an encrypted application?
Yes, ma'am.
Taking a look at People's 62. Do you recognize that email?
I do.
And what was this email about?
It's an August 5th, 2016 email sent by Keith Davidson to me, and it states, "Michael, please call me at your convenience. Thanks."
And was this after AMI had signed the deal with Karen McDougal?
Yeah,
And did you end up having a call with Keith Davidson about the matter?
I did.
Could you describe just generally the substance of the call? You can take that down. Thank you. Actually, do you know what? Let me just ask you, when you received this email, did you then call Keith Davidson?
I did.
As per his request?
Yes.
All right. So tell us, if you would just briefly, what the conversation was with Keith Davidson.
Great job. The boss, obviously very happy about it. The matter is now resolved.
Did Keith tell you that he had resolved the matter?
Yes.
And that was you telling him that the boss would be very pleased and thank you and good job?
Yes.
What's your understanding of why Keith Davidson reached out to you after this deal was concluded?
Objection.
Sustained.
Now, after AMI finalized the deal with Karen McDougal and paid the $150,000 for the life rights, and also for the other that she was going to be doing, did you have any conversations with Mr. Pecker about Mr. Trump reimbursing AMI for the money that AMI put out?
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
So David had asked me when he should anticipate receiving or being paid back the $150,000. He needed to get the $150,000, that he wanted the $150,000 back because it was too much money for him to hide from the CEO of the parent company. And he had also just laid out $30,000 previously. So he was putting pressure on me to speak to Mr. Trump and to get the money back.
Did you have several conversations with Mr. Pecker where he urged you to try to move it along and get him repaid?
Yes, I don't know if I would characterize it as urge as much as he insisted.
Was he upset about it?
Very.
So directing your attention now to about September of 2016, did you have lunch with Mr. Pecker where he pressed you further on that matter?
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about that matter?
So he asked me if I would meet him at his favorite Italian restaurant, and I went to meet with him. And again, he expressed his anger that I need to get this money back. And I said, look, Mr. Trump told you that he would pay you back, so he'll pay you back.
Did you, after the lunch meeting with Mr. Pecker where he was, as you say, upset about not being repaid, did you talk to Mr. Trump about that? Did you inform him of that?
I did.
And what did Mr. Trump say, in substance, about David Pecker's concerns about getting it paid?
Don't worry, I'll take care of it.
And did you discuss with Mr. Trump David Pecker's request for that money back on one occasion or more than one occasion?
Several occasions.
Around the same time, you have any conversations with Mr. Trump regarding other stories that AMI may have had in the past, and some concerns about that?
Yes.
Can you tell the jury a little bit about that?
So David had expressed to me that obviously the relationship with Mr. Trump goes back many, many years, and there is a file drawer or a locked drawer, as he described it, where files that relate to Mr. Trump existed. And at that point in time, David was being considered for the position of CEO at Time Inc., Time Magazine. And one of the concerns that I had, that I expressed to Mr. Trump, was if he goes, there is a series of papers there that relate to you.
And what was your concern specifically with respect to those stories and Mr. Pecker leaving AMI?
Well, I didn't know what those stories were, and nobody was discussing that with me, but that they would be open for use.
Meaning that other people might get their hands on them?
Yes, because we didn't know who the potential CEO or replacement would be.
And was Mr. Trump concerned about that at that point as well?
Yes.
Did you discuss with Mr. Pecker those concerns about whatever other stories AMI might have in that locked drawer?
Yes.
And what did Mr. Pecker say?
You could technically buy them. We will figure out a way for you to take control over them.
And around the same time, were you having some discussions with David Pecker about purchasing from AMI those life rights to Karen McDougal's story?
Yes, that was all part of the same transaction.
So, let me direct your attention now to September 6th, 2016. Did you record a conversation that you had with Mr. Trump about purchasing from AMI the life rights to Karen McDougal's story and these other stories that AMI might have?
Yes.
Now, during the 10 years that you worked for Mr. Trump, how many conversations with him did you tape?
None other.
So this was the only one?
Yes, ma'am.
Why did you feel it was important to tape this one conversation?
It was so I could show it to David Pecker, and that way he would hear the conversation so that he would know that we are going to be paying him. Mr. Trump is going to be paying him back because it was. It became a regular conversation between the two of us.
That he needed to be paid back?
And I also wanted him to remain loyal to Mr. Trump.
So how did you go about recording this conversation with Mr. Trump?
I had my cell phone in my hand and I put it on voice memo. All Apple iPhones have it. And I hit record and I walked in.
Walked in where?
To Mr. Trump's office.
And where did you put your phone when you recorded this conversation with Mr. Trump?
It was in my hand.
Did you sit down to talk to him? Were you standing when you had this conversation with him, or were you seated, if you can recall?
I don't recall.
About how far away were you from Mr. Trump when you made this recording using your phone?
On the opposite side of his desk.
To your knowledge, was Mr. Trump aware that you were recording this conversation?
No, ma'am.
Can you hand this to the witness, please? Thank you. I'm handing you a thumb drive that, among other exhibits, contains People's 246, which is a recording, and People's 248, a transcript.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Have you previously reviewed that recording, People's 246, and the transcript, People's 248, on that thumb drive?
Yes, ma'am.
How do you know that you reviewed those two exhibits previously?
Because it has my initials on it.
And you say it has. Would it be the thumb drive?
I'm sorry, the thumb drive has my initials on it.
Okay. And does it also have the date or just your initials?
It does.
You don't have to pull out the date, but it has the date and your initials. Now, People's 246, the recording of that conversation that you taped Mr. Trump on September 6th, 2016, is that an exact copy of the original audio recording that you made on your phone?
Yes.
And whose voices are on that audio recording?
Several people.
Who are they?
Mr. Trump, mine, Rona Graff.
When you say Rona Graff, was she in and out?
Rona Graff came in and out, but you certainly hear her voice. She's executive assistant again to Mr. Trump.
Now, what generally, before we listen to it, is discussed that's on that taped audio recording?
That I had been working with Alan Weisselberg in terms...
Well, let me stop you a second.
I'm sorry.
Just in terms of generalities, when you first walked in, was Mr. Trump on the phone?
Yes.
Does the audio recording capture some of his conversation on the phone?
Yes.
And did you discuss partly the purchase of materials from AMI?
Yes.
Did you also discuss another matter with him before you got to that?
Yes.
What generally was that?
Charleston. I was referring to a piece of property in Charleston.
Okay. Was it also generally a discussion of some divorce papers?
Yes.
That you had with Mr. Trump at the time?
Yes, that's another topic that came up.
Is that audio recording, People's 246, a true and accurate representation of the conversation you had with Mr. Trump on that day, on September 6th of 2016?
Yes.
Okay. Now, I mentioned a transcript, People's 248, that you also reviewed on that thumb drive. Did you compare that closely with the recording of the conversation?
I did.
Now, is that transcript just a portion of what's on the recording?
Yes.
And does it reflect the portion of the recording related to the purchase of those materials from AMI?
Yes, ma'am.
And is that transcript a true and accurate representation of that portion of the conversation regarding the purchase of materials from AMI?
Yes, there was one change that was made to one word.
Okay. And is what is currently the transcript that you reviewed?
Yes.
That you reviewed carefully against the tape. Is it true and accurate in terms of the words that are spoken by both yourself and Mr. Trump?
Yes, ma'am.
I would like to now play, please, one time through for the jury, People's 246.
Let me know what's happening, okay? Oh. Oh. Maybe because of this, it would be better if you didn't go. You know, maybe because of this, for that one. You know, I think what we should do is get rid of this because it's so false what they're saying. It's such bullshit. I think this goes away quickly. I think it's probably better. Do the Charleston thing, just this time. Yeah, in 2 weeks it's fine. I think right now it's better. You know? Okay, honey. You take care of yourself. Thanks, Pam. Yep, I'm proud of you. So long, bye. What's up, Mike?
Great poll, by the way.
Yeah,
Seen it. Great poll.
making progress.
Big time.
And you guys are good guy.
Oh, Pastor Scott?
I can't believe this. No, Pastor Scott. What's happening?
Oh, no. He's.
Can we use him anymore?
Oh, yeah. 100. No, you're talking about Mark Burns. We've told him
Well,
to.
I don't mean that. Mark Burns. Can we use him
No.
anymore?
No.
Richard Lefrak, I'm sorry, Richard Lefrak just called. He just had, we have a chance, he had an idea for you.
Okay. So we got served from the New York Times. I told you this regarding to unseal the divorce papers with Ivana. We're fighting it. Kasowitz is going
We
to.
should never be able to get that done.
Never. Kasowitz doesn't think they'll ever be able. They don't have a.
Give me your coat, please.
They don't have a legitimate purpose.
And you
So
have a woman that doesn't want to unseal.
correct.
So you've been handling it.
Yes, and it's
That's
all
been going on for a while.
for about 2-3 weeks now.
All you have to do is delay it for.
Even after that, it's not going to ever be opened. There's no purpose for it. Told you about Charleston. I need to open up a company for the transfer of all of that info regarding our friend David. You know, so that I'm going to do that right away. I've actually come up and
Give it to me.
I've spoken to Alan Weisselberg about how to set the whole thing up with
So what are we going to pay?
funding. Yes, and it's all the
Yeah, I was
stuff.
thinking about that.
All the stuff, because you never know where that company, you never know where he's going to
Maybe
be.
he gets hit by a truck.
Correct. So I'm all over that, and I spoke to Alan about it. When it comes time for the financing, which will be,
Listen, what financing?
we'll have to pay you. So
No, pay with cash.
no. I got no. Hey, no. How are you?
And if we can play it once in its entirety. Thank you. Now, Mr. Cohen, let me ask you. The first 2 minutes or so of the conversation were not related to the Karen McDougal matter. Is that right?
That's correct.
That's when Mr. Trump was on the phone and when you were talking to him about some other divorce papers in Charleston. Is that right?
Yes, as well as Pastor Mark Burns.
So I'm now going to ask for us to listen to just some portions. We are going to stop and start it. I'm going to ask you a few questions. So if we could play now the recording from minute 2 and 4 seconds to 2 and 15 seconds.
Told you about Charleston. I need to open up a company for the transfer of all of that info regarding our friend David.
And then I will ask you a few questions. First of all, who is our friend David?
It's referring to David Pecker.
And what did you mean by, I need to open a company regarding the transfer of all that information? What were you talking about?
Well, to open up an LLC, and the LLC would be the beneficial owner of all of the information that was contained in that drawer that David was referencing.
And all that information, including also the Karen McDougal matter?
As well as the Karen McDougal matter.
What was the reason for talking about opening up a company?
In order to have separation, keeping it away from Mr. Trump.
Now, why was it important to keep it away from Mr. Trump, the purchase of that information?
For privacy purposes and for the benefit of Mr. Trump.
Now, you didn't refer to Mr. Pecker by his full name. You just said David. Why didn't you use his full name? And was this sort of typical for this conversation?
It wasn't necessary. Mr. Trump knew who I was referring to. It was an ongoing conversation that we had been having.
Can we play now the recording from 2 minutes and 15 minutes to 2 minutes and 21 seconds?
David, so that I'm going to do that right away. I've actually come up and I've spoken to Alan Weisselberg about how to set the whole thing up.
Thank you. You mentioned within your conversation with Mr. Trump, Alan Weisselberg?
Yes.
Who was he at the time?
Alan Weisselberg was the chief financial officer of the Trump Organization.
And why did you tell Mr. Trump that you were setting up the LLC and discussing it with Alan Weisselberg?
Because Mr. Trump had previously directed me to speak with Alan Weisselberg about getting this matter handled.
And why were you letting Mr. Trump know that you had been in discussion with Mr. Weisselberg about this?
Because we are going to need money, and we are going to need to open up the LLC and to resolve this issue.
And Mr. Weisselberg's role at the time, you said, was
chief financial officer. He handled all of the finances. It was every penny that came in or out went through Alan's office.
And so this was partly why Mr. Trump directed you to work with him. And this was not unusual for you to work with Mr. Weisselberg on financial matters regarding Mr. Trump. Is that right?
Correct.
Now, what did you understand Mr. Trump to mean when he said, "What do we have to pay for this? What do we got to pay for this?"
We were referring to the $150,000 that was advanced by AMI in order to purchase the life rights of Karen McDougal.
So when Mr. Trump said, "What do we got to pay for this? $150?" What was your understanding about the state of Mr. Trump's knowledge at that point about how much money it was going to take to purchase this?
Objection.
Overruled.
He already knew based upon conversations with David, which is why he mentioned the number 150.
Now, can we play the rest of the tape through, just to the end?
With
So what are we going to pay?
funding, yes. And it's all the stuff. All the stuff, because you never know where that company, you never know where he's going to be.
Gets it by
Correct. So I'm all over that. And I spoke to Alan about it when it comes time for the financing, which will be.
Listen, what financing?
We'll have to pay you. So
Don't pay with cash.
No. I got no.
Hey, Bill, how are you?
Thank you. Now, what was the significance of all that stuff that was mentioned?
All that stuff is referencing the information that David Pecker had accumulated over the years of Mr. Trump that was in that alleged locked door or drawer.
And including also the Karen McDougal story?
And including Karen McDougal.
Now, what was the conversation about someone maybe getting hit by a truck? What was that about it?
As I had said before, Alan Weisselberg was being considered. I'm sorry. David Pecker was being considered for the CEO position of of Time Inc., and the concern was the information. So all the stuff refers to that.
Now, you mentioned the word financing, and Mr. Trump asked you about that. Can you explain that?
That was not the best usage of the word. What I really meant was funding, not financing.
And what did you mean by what you had? What needed to be funded?
How much money needed to be paid?
Paid to who?
Paid to David Pecker, AMI.
Okay. And is that what you understood by, "We will have to pay him something"?
Yes.
By, "We have to pay him something"?
Yes.
What did you understand Mr. Trump to mean by saying, "pay with cash"?
Well, to pay in green, which would obviously be one way to avoid any type of a paper transaction, but that's not what I thought was the best way to do it.
And so, is that why you said no?
Correct.
Did you want to take a break, Your Honor?
It's up to you. Is this a good time?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Jurors, let's go ahead and take our morning recess. We'll see you in about 15 minutes.